Welcome to Breaking Ties, a new you after divorce. This is your go-to source for practical advice and support for when the divorce process has finished. Join us each weekday for a quick chat where we'll cover a variety of topics related to post-divorce. Together, we'll explore the emotional, financial, and legal aspects of life after divorce and help you find the best path forward for you and your family. Here's your host and Certified Divorce Financial Analyst professional, Mike Fulkerson.
Welcome to the Breaking Ties interview series, where we talk with a professional who assists those getting through the divorce process and answers many of the common questions you may have. I'm your host, Mike Fulkerson, and with me today is Marson Maynor. Marson is a loan officer with Geneva Financial and has a tremendous amount of knowledge with mortgages. Welcome to the podcast, Marson.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
How you doing today?
I'm doing great, dude. Looking forward to sharing some knowledge.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And so for our listeners, really what we're doing is a 5-part series this week on mortgages and divorce. So each day is going to be a different set of questions for you to listen to and fill in some of the gaps you might have with regards to how the process works and what happens and takes place during the divorce process. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. You ready, Marson?
You betcha, man. Bring it.
All right. Question number 1 today. What happens to the marital home in a divorce?
So obviously, it's going to depend a lot about how the divorce decree is laid out and the negotiations between the spouses on what happens. But typically, there's 2 real things that will happen. Either you sell the property and, get those proceeds back and then divvy those up if that's part of the divorce negotiation, or continue to own the property and determine, if both parties will still live in the house or if only one of the spouse will live in the house. Obviously, if there's kids involved, that is a whole dynamic of its own, other than just two spouses splitting. You have to, consider the kids and schools and all that other kind of stuff. So typically it just depends on what, is done through the negotiation and then the divorce decree, which will determine what will be the situation for the home, if you will.
Right. Yeah. There are a ton of variables that go into what's going to happen to the house in the divorce kind of thing. Now, one of the interesting caveats and that someone asked was, can a couple continue to co-own the house after the divorce?
Absolutely. So, going through a divorce is got its own specific, challenges and agreements that need to be thought out and discussed. When it comes to a mortgage, you've already done it. You've signed the loan paperwork, you've signed the mortgage paperwork, you've got the name and title. Under the lenders, if you will, the lender doesn't really care about, what you do or what somebody does as far as a divorce goes. All they care about is getting their payments back, getting the payments made for the money that they borrowed. So the lender really don't have a requirement as to what needs to happen during divorce or after divorce. They just want to make sure that payments are being made and being made on time. If they need to change that up, then they could definitely talk to their servicer, their current, person they're making more payments to, or they can talk to a lending professional, and then they can talk about what, different avenues they can have going down that road, for sure.
Huh. Wow. Great information right there.
Yeah.
And as a couple makes their way through the divorce process, there's that division of assets that you had talked about earlier and how the negotiations take place. How is the home's value determined for property division?
Typically, if you're going to divide the property, meaning you're going to sell the property and then whatever remaining proceeds are left over, split that up, then if you hire a real estate agent will do their due diligence and determine comparative market values on similar homes, to the home that's in question. And then they'll list that property. And then ultimately, once that property is sold, whatever the agreed sales price is, that will be the factor that's being used by taking out any liens against the property, cleaning up any mortgages, any past due taxes, anything like that, and then paying any, closing fees, realtor commissions, whatever is left over from that number then would be divvied up depending on how the divorce decree reads, 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, yada, yada. It just depends on what that is. That's if they're going to sell. If they're thinking of keeping the home, then depending on if, which one of the spouses is going to retain the home, they would want to then talk to their own lender, because what's going to happen is they're going to want to refinance the other spouse off. So that spouse can be, separated from the ownership, separated from the legal responsibility of making payments. And then they'll also be able to open up that part of their budget, so to speak, so that they can go qualify and possibly purchasing a home on their own if that's what they're looking to do.
Gotcha. Yeah. So when we look at, values, it's no different than any other asset. It's going to have its own value, and whether or not you're underwater or not underwater, or if there's a lot of equity or a little equity, is all up for discussion during the process. Mm-hmm. Now, as a couple goes through the divorce process, who's responsible for the mortgage?
All the lender cares about, all the servicer cares about, is whoever's name is on the promissory note, the document that they signed at closing stating that they're responsible for monthly payments. If it's both spouses, then the servicer doesn't care if money comes from either one or from a joint account. From a divorce standpoint, that's something that might be part of the negotiation. But at the end of the day, if, let's say, it's determined that, spouse A is both spouses are on the mortgage, but spouse A is no longer going to be responsible due to what the courts say, the only way that spouse A can remove their obligation is by spouse B then refinancing into their name, or again, go back to just selling the home and splitting, whatever is left over, so to speak. So, the bottom line is whoever signed the promissory note stating that they're obligated to make those payments, that person is still obligated, and at least a payment a month needs to be made consistently on that. Otherwise, it will create a delinquent situation.
Right. Yeah. And we definitely don't want to do that. And that's a whole nother conversation on credit and qualifying and everything else that we're going to have later this week as we get through the questions for the interview series. And so this is going to wrap up day one here on the podcast. Yeah. How you feel, Marson?
Good stuff, man. I feel good. I hope this is helpful for, your listeners, and, there's not one size fits all or one right answer for anyone, man. A divorce is its own, set of challenges and things like that. And then when you start, figuring out other assets and how those are going to play out, it creates much challenge. So the best thing to do is always reach out to a professional in that particular field and get get information that way. Even check with a few just to, see what they say. That's all you can do. Right?
Exactly. That's great advice. Yeah. So for our listeners, once again, this is going to be a week-long series of questions on mortgages and divorce, and we're going to have more discussion coming up. Marson and I would like to thank you for joining us today on the Breaking Ties interview series. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Should you have any questions for Marson, you can find his contact information in the podcast description. Until next time, remember, divorce is not the end of your story. It is the start of your next great chapter. Take care, everybody.
How we going?
We want to thank you for listening to this episode of Breaking Ties, a new you after divorce with Mike Fulkerson. For questions, please reach out to Mike via email in the description, or give him a shout at 630-444-1410. Remember to subscribe, like, and follow.